So hello, welcome to this MML sample lecture. My name is Heather Webb, and I'm in the Italian section of the MMLL faculty. And today I'm going to be talking with you for about 20 minutes about some of the skills we use in your languages degree. So you may already be familiar with the skills of learning languages, perfecting your languages, and that's of course a good part of what you'll do here. But we will also work with you throughout your time at Cambridge on perfecting your skills of analysis, your skills of interpretation. And we like to challenge you to work across different kinds of texts. In the first year of the Italian section, for instance, you'll be given a big kind of taster course where you will have an opportunity to try out working through the interpretation of all kinds of different texts. And we don't expect you will have had previous experience with this, but we expect you'll jump in and give it a try. And so I wanted to give you kind of a taste of that today. I think one of the things that distinguishes us is the way in which we will ask you to work through not only literary texts, but also visual ones. And I know you'll be familiar with work in English and so forth, in working your way through literature and poetry. But many of you perhaps will not have spent time analyzing paintings or other sources of visual art. And what I'd like to show you today in this brief presentation is how some of those skills that you already have for your work on literature can be transferred over to the analysis of visual texts. So I'm going to take what I think is a really fun Italian medieval example. We'll be looking at Giotto's Arena Chapel in Padova and Dante's Comedy. And we'll be talking about how these two texts, one visual and one verbal, from around the same period of time, engage with similar questions. And don't worry if you don't know anything about these yet. We'll just dive in and see how we go. So we'll start with where we are. The city of Padova, in English we say Padua, is located here, if you can see my little arrow on the map with that red triangle. So it's in northeastern Italy, and that's what we'll be talking about today. This is a nice shot of the Piazza delle Erbe in Padova, where there's a lovely little market set up on a daily basis that sells fruit and vegetables. And this is our main location for our discussion of the Scrovegni Chapel, as it's sometimes called, or the Arena Chapel, as it's also called, because it's located close to an ancient Roman arena in Padova. And it was built by the Scrovegni family, so thus the two possible names for this place will be entering into virtually today. So here we are inside, and I like this photo because it gives a sense of the whole. We'll be looking closely at a number of different paintings inside the Scrovegni Chapel today, but before we delve into the particular, I wanted to give you a sense of the whole to the degree with which that's possible with a photo. But as you can see, it's a glorious space full of color, and a profusion of images. And so as soon as you step inside, it can be quite an overwhelming experience of beauty and emotion of all kinds. But let's take a look at some specifics. So when you approach a text, what I'm going to suggest to you today is that the skills that you use for approaching a verbal text and a visual text are actually the same. So you may say, I have no experience unpacking or interpreting paintings, but it turns out you do. And here are some of the questions you can ask yourself when you approach either kind of text. So the questions you can ask are, what do I know about the context? What period was this produced in? Where? Anything of that nature can help you begin to think about how you're going to approach what it is that you're looking at. The next question may sound kind of personal, but I'll show how that can really help guide our processes of interpretation. The question is, how do I engage with the text, or how do I engage with the image? And this might be something like noticing how it makes you feel, or what it is that you look at first, or what it is that your eye is drawn to, or the part of the text that has the strongest impact on you. And think these things through for yourself, because then this draws you to another question, the next question I have there. So what is it in the text or in the image that I'm looking at that prompts me to engage in the way that I do? So is there something that is specifically drawing my attention? Why is it that I keep coming back to this line of the poem? Why is it that I keep coming back to this figure in the bottom right-hand corner? Is there something that's pointing me towards that? So trust your instincts here, and don't think, well, maybe it's just random that I'm looking at this, or maybe it's just random that I'm feeling this way. Trust your skills of interpretation and ask yourself then, in relation to that, what it is in the visual image or the text that is prompting you to engage in the way that you do. And another really important thing that we always discuss with students who freshly arrived is you don't have to immediately say, oh, it's about this. You know, here's the meaning of this thing that I'm looking at. You might get there, and you might also learn to come away from a big blanket statement like that. What I'm going to suggest we do instead is start with these formal elements. Start with things that you notice. What am I noticing? Why am I noticing these things? What draws my eye? What draws my attention? Start with a description of the formal elements. Start thinking about what those formal elements are doing and allow them to lead. So rather than starting with, oh, I know it's going to be about this, what's actually there? What am I looking at? What am I seeing? Let's describe what I'm looking at. Let's describe what I'm seeing. And then we'll see what emerges from that. So, things to look for in poetry. You may all know this really well, but we'll just go through it quickly. Some of the things you might look for in poetry: is there a narrative? Is there a story being told? What is that story? Is there some kind of key action taking place? What is the color or tone of the passage? Does it feel dark? Does it feel bright and sunny? How about the structure of the text that we're looking at, or the image that we're looking at? We'll see how these two things will come together. What is the structure of the poetic text? How many stanzas does it have? Is it long? Is it short? How long are the lines? What kind of spaces does it create? Listen to the sound of it. What sort of sounds are produced, right? What can we say about the rhythm of the poetic lines? Is there rhyme? What is the rhyme doing? Is the rhyme calling us to emphasize anything? What kind of effect does the rhyme have? We might also ask about any kinds of special effects. Is there something that's visible that is being kind of catchy or grabs us? Then again, we'll look at the length of the line, the visuality, the way the lines are presented on the page, what is being suggested there. So these are a number of things. Of course, there are loads more things you might want to look at when you analyze poetry, but this is just, I think, some basics that, of course, you will be familiar with. Now, I'd like you to notice what it is that we look for when we look at visual text, and you'll find it's really almost exactly the same thing. We could look for color. We could look to see what color is doing. We can look for lines across, that are created by shapes, that are created by forms. We can look at the spaces that are created within the visual text. We might think about the presence of light or darkness, lack of light, presence of light. We might look out for what the human figure is doing. We'll ask ourselves again, as we did with the poetry, is there action? Is there an action here? What action are we looking at? Is there a narrative? Is a story being told? How is that story being told? If there's landscape here, it's usually doing work. It's not just there to be decorative or to offer backdrop, in the same way that in a work of literature, if the landscape is being described, it's not just as a pretty detail, but it's going to be doing some work to tell us something about the action, about the ideas, about the characters. What about the architecture? So in the same way that a poem will create its kind of spaces, so will a visual text. So I should point out, by the way, that the way we work with visual texts in MML is very different from the way that visual texts are worked with in, say, an art history department. So what I'm talking about in this sample lecture today is really more of the kind of work we would be doing in MML, where again, we're interested in working with problems of text and image from the point of view of thinking broadly about culture, and a broader understanding of, in this case, medieval Italian culture. So I wanted to also suggest for you this wonderful resource that the University of Leeds has put forward. It's done by my fantastic colleagues in Italian there, including Professor Matthew Traherne. And what they've got here is what they describe as an online introduction to formal analysis. And this is what we're doing, kind of very minimal taster version of today. If you get engaged with this material, I would really strongly suggest you go to the Leeds website here. They have this online course which takes up to 10 hours to complete. You can take your time with it, and it's a really great project to go through. So again, just to come back to where we are, we're talking about the Scrovegni Chapel in Padova, and I wanted to give you some more resources you can look at. The images that I'm using come from the Web Gallery of Art, which is a wonderful online resource, and kindly gives us permission to use the materials for educational purposes. The website is also really easy to remember. It's wga.hu. So please do go and have a look. There are all kinds of wonderful works of art that you can zoom in on, have a close look at. And there's a little bit of description for each work, and gives you a little bit of information on each, and then you can always go and find further information. But these will give you really great, vivid images. You'll see some of these in a moment, starting right here, in fact. So here, what are we looking at? Let's start our practices of interpretation and ask ourselves what is at work here. And I'm going to take us back and forth between poetic text and visual text, as I warned from the outset. We're going to see how you can look at these same issues of line, structure, and so forth, color, and formal forms to draw broader conclusions, both in a work of visual art and in a verbal work. But perhaps let's start with the bit that seems a bit more obvious, probably for most of you, which is working with poetry. And I'd like to take this passage from Dante's Inferno. It's Canto 5 of Dante's Inferno. And this is a work that's written at the beginning of the 14th century, the early 1300s. And Dante describes his voyage through hell, where at a moment of difficulty in his life, he is given the gift of the possibility to travel through hell, purgatory, and paradise in order to gain understanding of the worlds after death and to find a way to reach change in his own life. And this is a moment in Canto 5. So Dante proceeds through hell and meets all these groups of sinners who are suffering punishments for poor decisions in life. And in Canto 5, he meets the lustful. And so what I'd like us to do is look at this passage, and I want you to think about, as I'm going through it, I want you to think about the kinds of questions we ask that we'd be looking at for the purposes of interpretation. Now, I'm going to read the Italian. And one of the things we do if you start a languages degree here is we even if you're starting, a lot of people start Italian from scratch. Most people start Italian from scratch. Very few of those who come to us have done it in school previously. And that's not a problem, because you'll have excellent language instruction. We have wonderfully brilliant language teachers who will get you in the space of a year to be really Italian speakers. But another thing we'll do on the literature and culture side is get you reading in the original straight away. So we'll do that with a lot of help, right? So Dante's Italian is not the easiest to get through, but there's lots of parallel translations. So very, very frequently you'll find a translation, you can get a book, for instance, this is from Durling and Martinez's edition of Dante's Inferno. It's very nice to read because you've got the Italian on one side and the English on the other. Robin Kirkpatrick from Cambridge has another edition. Again, you've got the English on the other side, so you can go back and forth between the pages. If you want to try out the Italian, you can very easily see what it's saying by moving across the page. So, amor col cor gentil ratto s'apprende, prese costui della bella persona che mi fu tolta, e il modo ancor m'offende. Amor ch'a nullo amato amar perdona, mi prese del costui piacer sì forte, che, come vedi, ancor non m'abbandona. Amor condusse noi ad una morte, Caina attende chi a vita ci spense. Queste parole d'allor ci fuor porte. So what have you noticed here? There are loads of things you will have noticed. I'm just going to talk about a very few of them. And we'll think about, again, those skills of what it is that we're looking for. You can think of this, the previous slide with your list. So something you might have noticed right here is the sound of it, right? So that's why I wanted to read it to you in Italian. You hear the sound of it is very soothing, lulling, beautiful, all those O sounds, the A sounds, amor, amor, amor. There's this kind of incantatory repetition of the word amor, which, as you can see by looking across to the English, is love, if you didn't know that already. Probably one of the words that will have come out to you straight away. Anyhow, so this incantatory repetition of love. So the sinner here, whose name is Francesca da Rimini, speaks very beautifully, and like many of the sinners in Dante's Hell, will trick us if we're not careful into thinking that these are wonderful people and none of this could possibly be their fault. And so here she tells us this beautiful story about love and how she was, hopelessly subjected to the powers of love and really could do nothing to prevent herself from following love's dictates. So you'll notice, if you look carefully across the page, that in each case she says it's love who's doing all the things, right? She makes love the agent in each of these moments that lead to her death, right? So she talks about love naturally is kindled in all noble hearts. And so her lover, Paolo, had to fall in love with her because of the way in which this just sort of naturally happens to him. And then she talks about, in the second terzina, those are the 3 lines, you can see the poem is organized in these sets of 3 lines. She talks about amor, again, does the work of making her have to love him in return, right? And then finally, amor condusse noi ad una morte. What is the result of this inevitable reciprocal love? They're both carried toward death. And you'll notice, this is where paying attention to these formal aspects is very, very strong. Amor condusse noi ad una morte. What do you hear in una morte? We've been hearing amor, amor, amor so much in this passage that by the time she gets to death, sounds like love again, right? So love into death, that happens very, very literally here. And in this kind of sonorous effect, we get transported along with Francesca into the sense of inevitability. As a whole, the comedy will show us that, in fact, none of this is inevitable. There's always choice for each human being. But you can see how the poetry does this work of bringing us in. There's also rhyme that's working here in this kind of, that helps us with this kind of incantatory effect. Perdona, abbandona. It's called terza rima in Dante's poem, where every 3rd line rhymes, right? Okay, so those are some of the kind of structural things. You'll notice we took note of textual details, like the repetition of the word amor, like what the rhyme was doing, the sounds of the O's and the A's, and from that we were able to deduce some of the meaning of the passage and maybe something of what the poet is trying to get us to do. Now let's move from that to Giotto, and we'll see what sort of analysis we can do on a visual text in the same kind of way. So this is the meeting at the Golden Gate. It's been described as the most famous kiss ever depicted in painting. And there's a good reason for this. And so there's a nice parallelism as well in that with the Dante passage where in Inferno 5, Francesca will go on to describe her first fateful kiss with Paolo and how that is what, sort of inevitably draws them forward towards their sin. This is a very different kind of kiss that happens here. These are the parents of the Virgin Mary. And this kiss is meant to show, in some ways, it was often understood in the period to depict the moment in which she was created miraculously. So there is a whole kind of aspect of miraculous creation happening here. But even if we don't know that, and prior to knowing that, we can see that there's something very special about what's going on here. If you look carefully, you can see how we are drawn to this kiss and how it's very impactful, and it's meant to show a really crucial theological moment taking place here. How does Giotto do this? How does Giotto draw our meditative attention to this really critical moment in the theology of the time? Well, notice the lines. Right? The same way we looked at the rhymes, the same way we looked at repetition. If you can see, we've got a whole cascade of figures that lead us toward this kiss, this moment here. Now they're just set off from the arch, and the arch leads toward them, even as the bridge leads along towards them, even as we have this cascade of arms that bring us toward them. And then, of course, you have this wonderful, from all this movement in this direction, you have this wonderful embrace here where you've got Joachim putting his arm around Anna. Anna has wrapped her fingers into his beard, and you can see little bits of beard hair sticking through between her fingers. So you can get this kind of sense of intimacy in the embrace there. The halos cross and mingle. Part of Anna's face is hidden behind Joachim's. So you can see how the kind of dynamism of this moment of coming together is really privileged to show the miraculous event taking place here, which will result in the birth of the Virgin Mary and will result eventually in the birth of Christ. So here you can see how we are drawn inevitably into spending time in that moment. The question that's often asked is like, why all these extra people? Really, we need these two. So we might ask ourselves, what is going on? What about the mysterious woman who's looking the other way? What about this guy coming in from the side? And in each case, what we can notice is that all of these figures work to bring us into the scene. So the most intense patterns of light fall here on Joachim's leg, on the halos, but there's a way in which each of these figures leads us inevitably towards these two bodies that themselves form an arch, like the arch behind them. So in some ways, we become like these onlookers, like these people standing nearby and looking towards the central thing. And the more time we spend looking and wondering why this woman's looking the other way and looking around, in the end, we'll still keep coming back. I asked you to pay attention to what it is your eye is drawn to, and your eye will inevitably be drawn to these two figures here and this moment of union. And so what Giotto has done is find lots of lines that bring us into that moment. So these are just two examples. There's lots more you could think about as you look at this painting, this stunning fresco painting, which, like Dante's text, is painted at the beginning of the 14th century in the early 1300s. And so you could find all kinds of parallels in the way in which these two texts work to engage us, to bring us into the text with a sense of emotion and interest. So I'm going to stop there. I hope I've given you just a couple of examples of the kind of work you can do and the way in which you yourselves can set to work on looking at some other frescoes from Giotto. If you want to go through wga.hu to look at some other images from the Scrovegni Chapel, and set yourself the task of taking that slide with the different points to look for, and ask yourself some of these same questions. Where is my eye going? Why is it going that way? Are there colors that are pointing me in that direction? Are there kind of parallelisms of structural forms, architectural forms? take a little section from Dante's comedy. Go find, it's all online. You don't even need to have, you don't need to have a book. Dante's comedy is all online everywhere with translation. So look it up, find yourself a chunk of text, and try playing the same game with yourself. Look at the Italian, look at the English, and ask what's going on here. What is the poet trying to pull us into? And I hope you have fun with it, and I hope I've shown that you have the skills to do all of this analysis, and this is the kind of thing we can work on together, hopefully one day when we see you at Cambridge. So thank you very much.